Leander, I think you're muted if you're if you were trying to get started.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Hello? Yes. For some reason, my Zoom window is frozen. I don't, let me see if I can control the slides. Yes. Yes, that works. So, okay, I can give the talk now. Do you want me to go ahead, or are there any introductory comments from your side?
Nope. You can go ahead.
Okay.
I've posted the notes in the chat channel for everyone.
Fine. So, okay. Okay, good. Thank you for the invitation. A couple of months ago, I came up with the idea for IIIF badges in one of the outreach working groups meetings, and then we had a discussion for some weeks or months, and now I'm invited here to give a talk about it, and I'm really glad to let you know how I got this idea for the IIIF badges. Maybe some short words about myself. My name is Leander Seige, and I work for Leipzig University Library. And in my free time, I also create small applications using IIIF, small toys maybe. And I think my talk will be a little bit broader, so it will also cover some aspects of the open cultural data community in Germany, for instance. So in the beginning of the talk, I would like to draw your attention to the Coding Da Vinci hackathons. This is a series of open cultural data hackathons in Germany, founded by Wikimedia Germany, the Open Knowledge Foundation Germany, the German Digital Library, and DIGIS. This is service institution in Berlin for digitization projects in cultural institutions. And during these hackathons, as of today, about 2,000 participants have developed more than 140 digital applications, digital cultural applications of very different kinds of things have happened there, and more than 190 cultural institutions, museums, galleries, archives, and so on have provided more than 280 data sets. And the conditions of these hackathons are that all data sets must be permanently published under an open data license, and on the other hand, all the projects in these hackathons must be published under an open source license. You can find all the details, the projects, and many data sets under codingdavinci.de. So this series of hackathons started 2014 in Berlin, and it's still ongoing. As right now, the hackathon Coding Da Vinci Niedersachsen, Lower Saxony, takes place, and then in 2021, Schleswig-Holstein will follow. And the first time I got in contact with these hackathons was in 2015. In Berlin, I represented the Leipzig University Library as a data provider there, and in 2017, the same thing happened. I provided data again, and then in 2018, we organized our own Coding Da Vinci hackathon in Leipzig. And finally, in 2018, I could join the hackathon in another role. So what does this have to do with IIIF? Until 2018, I think no data sets were provided by offering IIIF APIs, but in 2018, during Coding Da Vinci Ost, we provided the first data set containing medieval manuscripts using IIIF APIs. And during these hackathons, it is common practice that some people give workshops on certain technologies or API standards or something. And in 2018, I gave a workshop on how to use IIIF in your own application. And finally, in 2018, when our own hackathon was over, I finally could join the next hackathon as a hacker. This was what I always wanted, to be honest. Yeah, I was very much looking forward to participate myself and do some small experiments. And the application I developed is called Untils Ninja. Untils Ninja is a small program that analyzes paintings from IIIF resources, detects faces in them, and stores the information of the location of the faces in annotation files, and then the user is able to recombine the different parts of these faces into new artificial portraits. In Untils Ninja, I used the data from Städel Museum, Frankfurt Main, and I had to convert those images myself into IIIF resources, and I did the same with images from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But the third data source, the National Gallery of Art, already provides a set of fantastic paintings. I think this one is very popular, so you all probably know them. And 1 year later, my daughter and I developed another application called Cover Boutique. This is an application to create your own inlays for transparent phone cases using IIIF resources. You can combine different images with overlays and some modifications of the image composition. And finally, you can print out and have your own IIIF-based, so to say, phone cover. And of course, we always try to add new IIIF resources to these applications, but it turned out that this was actually a little bit harder than I thought in the first place. And I ran into several troubles finding usable content. So this was, this is an ongoing experience for me, that often IIIF implementations are not as usable as I expected them to be. So here are some examples. And of course, I have some disclaimers before. Of course, it is possible that the following examples reveal a lack of technical understanding on my side. So if this is the case, I apologize in advance, and I hope you appreciate my willingness to take the risks to embarrass myself. I hope this will not happen. And on the other hand, the following slides are, of course, pure fiction. So any resemblance to actual cultural institutions or websites are purely coincidental. As you probably know, recurring problems are the usual suspects, like the absence of HTTPS or CORS headers. But I often would missed the existence of collections so that I can crawl or harvest IIIF resources systematically. And sometimes there are also clear license statements missing. I think this is also an interesting aspect. If you want to use IIIF resources in your own applications, you need to know what the conditions are. Here are some detailed examples that might be a little bit entertaining. For instance, here we have a mismatch of ID and URI. This is an implementation that has localhost URIs as IDs. Or here we have an example with relative links to IIIF manifest, which actually would work if you recombine the base URL and URL part written here in the href attribute. Or some implementations are occasionally quite slow. Here we have an unfortunate placement of IIIF links. Or some implementations actually are based on IIIF, but do not provide the links. You can find links to Twitter, to Pinterest, or whatever. Even a download button may be there, but the link to the IIIF manifest is not available. So one thing I did for my own work is I developed a small Chrome extension to detect IIIF resources in websites. It's called Detective, and you can get it on GitHub, but I still consider it to be very experimental. And here's a nice example of another thing I discovered on this website. There is actually a nice manifest that comes with HTTPS and CORS HTTP headers, but the link to the image API is provided on HTTP. So I think it's still problematic to integrate these images into secure contexts. But the really interesting thing is that the same image API endpoint would be accessible via HTTPS, but it's just in the manifest just has the HTTP link. So, but what can we do about it? I experience such things quite often, and yeah, I think it would be a good idea to change something. And here's a completely different thing. It's I want to draw your attention now on the Open Library Badge. The Open Library Badge is an initiative in Germany to acknowledge the activities regarding open access and openness in general, maybe for libraries. So the Open Library Badge acknowledges the commitment to open source software, enabling text and data mining, promoting open access resources, and so on. And there's a very simple, transparent application process. Libraries first check their services against the list of criteria. Then they fill out and send in an application form. The badge team evaluates the application and finally informs the library about the outcomes of the application process. And here's an example how Hamburg University publicly speaks about the Open Library Badge and how they were awarded with it. And for my own institution, I can report that such an badge is really encourages libraries to really check their services and see and try to find points that can be improved regarding openness. And maybe this could also be a vision for some kind like a IIIF badge. You may also know this person and the 5-star open data rating system, maybe so to say. And this was also an association that came up during our discussion in the outreach group. So a IIIF interoperability badge. Sorry. I think the main intention, the aim of the badge is to raise awareness of the importance of technical implementation details, because in my experience, it's often there are only small details that prevent applications from use IIIF implementation. It's such small details, and in order to do so, I think it would help to fulfill IIIF's promise of interoperability. The checklist could contain a lot of aspects. I think a very basic thing would be that an image API and a presentation API, at least on manifest level, is implemented. The implementation should use HTTPS, I think, and provide sufficient HTTP headers. The next aspect would be to have collections for the resources, so it is possible from your own application to crawl through the data of an institution. On the user side, it would be helpful to provide visual links to IIIF manifests and IIIF endpoints, API endpoints, if they they should be well documented on the web so people can discover the APIs. And yeah, another much more advanced way would be if the institution uses the IIIF resources on its own institutional websites, and yeah, a multi-document workspace with persistent annotations would be, of course, a very advanced way to use IIIF. So a possible application process, this is just one option. It's just, it's derived from the application process of the Open Library Badge. Could be that an institution approaches the badge team and sends in an application form. The badge team then evaluates the IIIF implementation and gives the feedback to the institution, and then it's up to the institution whether to publish an awarded badge or not. But of course, it's also possible to just publish a list of criteria, a list of let's say, best practice recommendations or something like that. So this was just my idea. I wonder if the community, what the community thinks about it, and maybe something like this or something similar can be implemented in the future. And I'm happy to support it if it would happen. So that's for my side, and maybe I think Who's going to have the next slide? Otherwise, I think we should open up.
Oh, it's me, Leander. Just one slide. If you just go to the next, that would be fantastic.
Okay, so should I do something now? Or okay.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you. Hi,
Sorry.
everyone. Sorry. If you don't know me, I'm going to also turn on my camera here. My name is Rachel DeCrush. I work at the University of Toronto Libraries as a project librarian. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the outreach group and the manuscripts group as well. And I just wanted to tack on to Leander's presentation because when we were having this discussion earlier, it made me think of something in particular that I've dealt with in my own work and how this might be applicable or help in that situation, maybe not as just as a checklist, but some other aspects of that. So I've sort of been interested because I've had conversations over the past few months and things like that with other librarians, archivists, and also content owners that that made me realize I kind of took for granted this idea or this buy-in around open access and sort of this default kind of conversation that tends to happen at the beginning anyway when we were implementing IIIF and doing other things. We sort of had this sort of group buy-in consensus that we should be doing open access. We should, try to make as much as we have at the institution available to everybody. And it sort of became the sort of default way in which we wanted to manage our collections. But recently I've been, having conversations where not so much, I wouldn't call it resistance, but just concerns that are coming up around making these collections open access. And a lot of it, I think, comes down to sort of needing to understand a little bit more what IIIF really means and sort of concrete examples of kind of what people are going to be doing with these with this stuff that is open access and made by using IIIF. So when I saw this sort of list and these sort of ideas that Leander was bringing up about wanting to create these badges, what I was thinking of was how the implementation levels with all the examples of the things that Leander was trying to do or other people might have been trying to do as researchers that were running into roadblocks because of it. It's sort of showing kind of what it's possible to do with this implementation, or rather kind of what you're actually not allowing researchers and others to do with your content if you don't kind of hit these different levels of implementation. And it's sort of like a practical representation of the types of research or the types of things that you might be able to do if you did this, or that you're currently restricting by kind of not fully implementing in all these different ways. And sort of talking about the opportunities that are being made available. So kind of shifting focus away from that sort of default where I know myself as sort of like, to me, it's a kind of a given in what I do, obviously depending on the type of material. But for the most part, if it's something that we have in our rare book collection and our special collections that's out of copyright and all that kind of stuff, it's sort of like, to me, defaults like we would put it up. There's other concerns around that, but sort of like that's how I believe, like, okay, well, it's going to be open access and it should be IIIF because of all these reasons, and I kind of already made it there. But kind of shifting around away from that discussion of like, well, we should be doing this because this is our responsibility, and maybe like focusing it a little more about this is what sort of this interinstitutional activity that's going on, this sort of attempt to see like what all these institutions are actually being a part of and what sort of the outcome for that should actually be, and sort of this better support for research and reuse, and kind of framing it that way rather than, oh, we should be doing it because that's our responsibility, but looking at it as a more of a global kind of like institutional movement in which we're trying to actually help each other out and make our things better available and more interoperable, and these interesting ways that actually kind of answers why we would do this in the first place, or how and what other people are actually doing when they're implementing it and why they're doing it. And so I kind of see this was a good way for me to start actually changing the conversations that I've been having with people when I'm meeting a little bit of resistance around open access and about IIIF in general, and kind of sort of a very practical way of showing what others are doing, but also kind of what becomes available, what's not available, depending on what you actually do with your collections. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up as sort of where I was coming from when I was thinking about this. And I know other people may have had these conversations with others as well and concerns around their digital collections. So I just wanted to bring that up. And I also wanted to pass off to Claire, because she's also coming at this from a different point of view as well when it comes to badges. So Claire, if you'd like to take it away.
Thanks, Rachel. And can you go on the slide, please, Leander? Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm another of the co-chairs for the outreach group. And thank you very much, Leander, for doing all these slides and bringing them together for the group. So I'll just talk for a couple of minutes before passing us on for conversation about the badges, because we'd love to hear what you all think. We've had a couple of discussions about the badges at the outreach group meeting, and we wanted to bring it to you all to hear what you think and how we can take this forward and what you think of the idea. So one of the reasons why I support this is I work at an institution where we're implementing IIIF at the moment, and I think it's what's great is it's quite hard to know sometimes for IIIF, well, what bits do we do, what order, you know, it's such complex and it's been growing. So I think the badges helps set expectations of what to implement and also why. So this is where what Leander's done is sort of said, that this is the sort of criteria and this is why you do it and this is how end users can do that. And that's really useful, I think, for me to go, well, I think we should do this and this is why, you know, it's sort of preempting my conversations and explaining it why we do that. So it helps us include tasks to check things are done. It's a bit of a checklist for us of what to do that. And then we know when we do those things, it can get the maximum impact from implementing IIIF, and it can be used, as Rachel says, for the end users and Leander. So those tools that people can make from our implementation, if we've done all these things and we're not there going, why aren't people doing it with our sort of IIIF implementation? Because we don't realize we've missed that one thing or two things to get it done. I think this is a great basis for the reuse, as I say, of the content, but also best practice, that understanding who else is doing these badges, what people have done, means that when you go and look at others' implementations, as an implementer, you can say, oh, I know they've done that, or this is a link to their about page, or they've got all their collections there, so I can use that. So that's one of the reasons why I really support this and wanted to sit back to you for conversation about how we take this forward. So if anybody, Meg, have we got raising hands that we can do to hear from people?
I don't think they can raise their hands, but people can, if you either want to give a thumbs up and we can unmute you, or you can actually just unmute yourself as well to comment. Yeah, so to if you want to just give a thumbs up, if you'd like to speak, there's like a reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom window. You can just press that. But also feel free to just unmute yourself. There's not too many people on the phone, so I don't think it'll be hectic or anything.
Anybody who's written a comment want to sort of talk about what they think and how they think this could work?
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
And, first, I'll just, say out loud what I wrote in the chat, right? That I completely agree with all of the utility of this, effort. It instantly made sense to me when I heard about it, and helped me actually make some changes kind of on the fly in my implementation, which are very simple to fix, right? As Leander pointed out, these aren't hard things. They just sometimes get overlooked. And just to give a shout out to the D4H working group meeting tomorrow, we're going to be talking about a subset of these things in terms of discoverability of IIIF resources. So more about the UI, the visibility and the clickability. But it clearly overlaps here. Now the question about how to go about it, I think is a really good one, because it's not very clear, right? Exactly. I guess there's models out there like the Open Badge, but other than publishing a document somewhere that says here are some best practices, right? How do you go about it? And I guess it sounds like that's some of the work that the outreach group is kind of within scope for your group. But I don't have any answers. I'll just go ahead and be the first person to talk.
Thank you, that's greatly appreciated. And that's where part of the discussion at the outreach group has been, how do we take this forward and how do people think it would work, be it not too onerous, but also not that we keep the momentum going and that it's something we can sustain going forwards.
Maybe, can I ask a question that maybe kind of helps get into some of this? But I guess one question I would have to anybody on this call, so we've discussed this in pockets in the IIIF community a couple of times. And, you know, I think there's like some momentum, and so, you know, I think a lot of folks agree that it would work. But I guess a specific question I have, is there anyone on the call that thinks that, like, if this existed, would it help you in your particular institutional use case, like maybe make the case for some of the stuff, you know, the way Rachel was describing it? Like, would it help you make the case to maybe add more IIIF features, or, you know, like change the way, you know, add some new additional IIIF work? Would this be enough, you think, as like an advocacy tool in a certain way? And if so, like, that would be really interesting to hear from folks, if that would be enough or a useful element at their own institution.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sanin from the University of Cape Town, and this is really interesting because I guess for the last year I've been trying to work pretty much solo with the IT department on trying to set up a IIIF system. And even though there's a lot of resources out there and there's a lot of pointers to it, there still feels like there's quite a lot of gaps. So to have something like this would be very useful to know what the best practices are in terms of the documentation and all of that. But also if there was some kind of, like, I know there's an outreach community group, but somebody like that, some people who can help you, like going around different implementations and kind of taking you through the badge steps and like making sure you're hitting all the criteria. And I guess from an institutional point of view, if you got a badge, just thinking maybe because our library loves being certified among many different things, to have something like that that says you are now part of this, even if it might come with a small kind of fee, I'm not sure, might be really useful to drive the advocacy of it. So I think from somebody who's starting up, there's so many benefits to something like this. And I think it also, even though I know the IIIF community is quite huge and you can contact people on Slack, but it'd be nice to know if you're having like a more maybe dedicated support channel that's guiding you towards it. Thanks.
That's super. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think that's a really helpful and specific way that, you know, like I think this hits a lot of things in the community, but I think that sounds like a really specific way that maybe we could help position this to help other people in your same situation.
Hey, Josh, building on that comment, it reminds me of when I started, because I'm about 18 months almost into this implementation project, but I think I even messaged you at one point about this idea of an implementers group, but I don't think it fits the community group structure. And I wonder if, you know, there's some other structure for people who are getting started with and implementing IIIF, documents like this, documents like the thing we're producing out of the D4H group, but also almost like mentors or coaches or something, seems to overlap. That whole idea seems to overlap here as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious to hear other reactions and would love to hear other folks with implementation stories or notes. But to that point, Ben, I think that is really interesting, thinking of maybe like a cohort model, and maybe that's connected to, I don't know that it maybe is a permanent thing, but maybe that's if we get this badge effort off the ground, maybe there's like a cohort group or Slack channel or email list, whatever it might be. And just to say like, all right, like, you know, like, let's go through this process of, you know, of like working through the checklist, peer help on, you know, whatever small issues may be arising. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I could see that being an overlay on top of, say, like the technical channel in Slack. You know, there are other ways, but you're right, none of them are geared toward that specific kind of, yeah, like place and time and implementation, I think.
Yeah, Josh, I think it'd be really interesting to hear from those who have implemented, whether they'd be interested in sort of being those peers and mentor for a group or even a couple of people. You know, I could see that we could have a Slack channel where we have a couple of people who are going through implementation, that's the peer help, but also it's useful to have those mentors who have been there before, who can point you in the right direction or know have been through it themselves. So do we have anyone who's sort of been doing IIIF for a while who would sort of like to see how they see it from their point of view?
There's a question in the chat, by the way.
Yes, I think this is probably maybe one for Leander. So Andrew Wilson says, I've not got much experience with badges. What's the difference between open library badges and open badges?
I know about open library badges, but I don't know what open badges are. If I said open badges during my talk, then it was an accident. I just wanted to talk about the open library badges. And but I can report again that the open library badges, they have, I think, about 15 criteria this year. And if people start to compile all the information of the institution and then have it ready and check with the head of the library whether everything has been covered, then the questions arise, why don't we match this criteria? Why don't we match that criteria? And then the discussion in the institution starts. And this is the moment that is helpful to develop new services or improve services. But I'm not sure if this will work for IIIF implementation. So just, yeah, wanted to drop this idea and see if people find it useful.
This is Jack here. I can't really maybe speak to like the how badges might work, but we've definitely felt the same pains with you know, IIIF aggregation projects where all the implementations have different levels of consistency, and I like even just Leander, your checklists as just even a starting point, like to somebody that why and how these things are important, because I think that gives a really nice first stepping stone into the process. you know, for maybe who's somebody coming on to this for the first time.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that's where I was going. I mean, to forget the idea of compliance and everything, just publish the starting list of here's like good practices if they're not best practices, and kind of like grow it from there. And really, the one thing I would just mention is that it would be great if the API documentation, specifically the presentation API, which kind of gives you the rundown of how to construct a manifest, right? If that could link to somewhere in additional notes or at the very end, just to like give somebody an idea that there's some things you got to consider besides the actual raw construction.
Can someone clarify that for me a little bit? Like, what's being checked here that the validators aren't checking? Like, there already is a validator for my image API and presentation API. So if I validate, then aren't I compliant? Are we talking about certain kinds of non-automatable checks? And what would those be? And why can't we automate them?
That's a good question. I actually didn't, the problematic cases I found, I didn't really put them into the validator in order to see what the validator says about them. So I don't know if it's if it can be automated in that way. But some of the problems already arise directly in the websites. For instance, you don't even have a IIIF link to put into the validator.
So like in that case, it would be, I'm not compliant because I'm not showing people where my manifests are or something like that. So I don't get that badge.
For instance.
I mean,
I
that
guess, yeah, well,
it's like, sorry, real quick, Josh. I mean, it seems like doubling the work. Okay, one of the problems is they're not showing the they're not showing the manifest, and now, in addition to showing the manifest, we're asking them to show the badge, and I can't even get them to show the manifest. So, like, if they show the manifest, I know they're compliant with that level. I can't quite tell, but I mean, that's just my first thought.
I think it depends on the different aspects. If there are, if I don't know if the validator checks for HTTPS or CORS. I think it does, doesn't it?
I don't think so, honestly, but that could be something that it might check as a recommendation, but not a like a warning, but not a invalid.
But more,
guess,
no. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Jeff, to your point, I think I would say for sure a lot of this could be automated, and in fact, that's why I don't think the checklist is like super complicated, and I don't think we need, you know, like a Nobel committee, you know, 5-year working group to do that. Like, I think the evaluation of this can be very much pretty straightforward. I guess one way I think of it is like it's as much a social tool as it is, you know, like a strict validator. To me, the validator is very natively useful to a certain subset of the community, but like this is an effort maybe to like build in appeal of compliance and interoperability using the same criteria as the validator actually for a lot of this, but it's geared toward, you know, maybe more I don't know, administrative type folks, other folks. So but yes, I think there's a lot of overlap. At least that's the way I'm thinking of it.
Well, just to that point, what's the difference between showing the little IIIF logo with the manifest link versus showing a badge that says we do IIIF? Isn't the one already accomplishing? Isn't the former already accomplishing the latter?
I think partly the idea of this badge, and you know, not to be crass about it, but like I'm less worried about institutions like prominently displaying the badge, and it's more about it sort of putting an additional level of I guess impetus, an additional level of incentive to do it in the same way. So like lots of institutions, you know, make that little logo available, but some, you know, like Leander showed, so people just do it in different ways. So it's a little bit of a way, you know, we'll never solve every problem with the badges, but if we could make, you know, dozens of institutions more consistent, that seems like it seems like a relatively low lift way to do it, and potentially a good marketing effort and lots of other benefits.
I think also there's two badges, right? I mean, I think people are referring to the IIIF logo. And we actually just had this conversation in the D4H prep meeting. That's really an icon, right? And that icon can have a bunch of different actions, such as linking to the JSON file, but not always. But this, I think Leander's idea is a level above that. It's a badge that means you've met the checklist, which is not necessarily, that's not the same thing as the IIIF logo being visible on a user interface.
But it means it also means something more than validating. Is that correct? I missed can you give me one more example, Leander, of what that might be? Like something, an inconsistency above validation that's a problem?
For instance, if one aspect could be whether the institution provides IIIF collections or not. This cannot be automated. But maybe institutions are not aware or do not know about that. It would be helpful to users or software developers if IIIF collections exist. This would be an example. I don't know. Is this the kind of example you wanted me to?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I'm not saying I don't have this problem. I'll pull in manifests from different things into Transcribus, all of which validate, but some, the validator that Transcribus uses rejects some and doesn't others. So there's something going on there that even though two manifests are validating, another stricter validator is rejecting some and not others. So I just can't tell if that's a problem that can be fixed by increasing the strictness of the validator or something's out of sync, or if there's some reason the spec needs to be sort of open to multiple possibilities, but those different possibilities are then preventing the kind of interoperability I want. I haven't really been able to tell, but that's the example that comes to my mind. Yours about collection is another good example that's slightly different. So.
I think Trip's point's really good. Trip, are you able to unmute and say what you've just put in the chat?
Sure. Basically, that badging to the extent it has worked. So context here is that I'm in the US at an R1 at a place where, at least at a student level, badging hasn't made really any inroads, and staff not much either. But so to the extent I've seen badging work out there, it's been for things that are completed. You do something, it's like a certificate. In fact, I think there was a good blog post about open library badges that talked about the connection between certificating and badging. But it's something that's done, you get the badge and you move on. So what happens when there's an ongoing issue and at any given moment, a site is in compliance or not? It's kind of like the old W3C valid CSS things that people would put on their websites. And that's great when you get it, but 5 minutes later, maybe you don't have valid CSS. So this, I mean, it's got to be a perennial issue with badging. So I'm sure I'm not the first to think about this.
Well, that works well with like Travis CI badges and build badges. So, you know, it's they go the badge comes and goes depending on your build. So it could be when it goes out of date automatically, it could be very helpful because then you lose the badge. It's like, why did I used to have that badge, it went away. Like, oh, there must be something wrong. But that depends on the kind of automated workflow, something that can be checked like that.
Right. Right, in my mind, it spins out a little too early probably, but where all of a sudden we've got, I don't know, whose validator is validating all of the IIIF implementations out there. That's Glenn.
Yeah. Though it would be helpful with my transcribus problem because it's like, it's helpful to know like the official IIIF validator is validating all of these. A given program's implementation of a validator is not, and then it's helpful to know, you know, it's passing these checks or not. But yeah, whether or not one validator can, they'll have to know about them all in advance, I guess.
I'd like to emphasize again that I agree with Josh on the social aspect of the badges. I think it's not about technical perfection, but it's about raising awareness. I think that in my mind, this would be the main aspect of such a badge system.
Yeah, I like the social aspect of it because I've written many an email to IIIF adopters to say, hey, I recognize that you're doing this, and while it's technically not this, you know, it's technically compliant, it really makes it difficult for interoperability. Would you be open to doing this? And, you know, if there was something to be able to point to rather than like, do this so you get a badge, but more of just like, here's some, you know, this checklist or something, that maybe often makes those types of emails easier to point to.
That's exactly what I did. I also wrote a lot of emails of this kind. Could you please add the course header? Could you please change this URI to HTTPS or something like that?
Yep. And many times they're like, of course, yeah, no problem, great.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
But if those kinds of things, Jack, are stopping interoperability, like, don't we need to make an appeal to like, well, that's what the spec is supposed to help guarantee. So shouldn't we be improving the spec to mandate those like ambiguities rather than kind of build a second system to, it's like a second spec on top of a spec when we already have a spec. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't answer that. But I think it's like, you know, so like, I mean, with the HTTPS question, that was in presentation 3, that was added as a recommendation in presentation 3. I know I brought that up, and that was added as a recommendation for interoperability.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, like it's, you know, somebody has a presentation 2 site, you know, and how do we, oh, you could update to HTTPS and do this and add CORS headers. Is it technically compliant without that? Yeah. So yeah, I don't know where the spec falls into this. And I like it more of kind of as a social best practices.
It's just a seal that confirms that your implementation is aligned with the specifications somehow. No, I think that's not the point.
Well, if there's any analogy to the, like, for example, the accessibility specs, there is a spec, but there are like compliance levels 1, 2, 3, and most institutions like begin with 1 and like end up with a level 2 and they say they strive for a level 3. So is that like, could that be a proper analogy for our case?
I think that's a good aspect to think about, because also, like with accessibility, there are nuances. You can have alt text for images, but do you have good alt text for images? You can have contrast that's okay, but are, I don't know, there's a lot of parts of accessibility that are nuanced, but you can still claim compliance or conformance or achievement, depending on what you want to call it, and what it is. And it's somewhat understood that it's a fluid situation, that it's not like you are in compliance with accessibility and none of the rest of anything that your institution generates is out of compliance.
Would the badge do anything for the like customers/users when somebody visits a site and there's a badge level 2 displayed on it? Would that like, I mean, would that be meaningful in some way? Okay, I can trust this site or something like that.
I think the answer from my perspective is yes, for like digital humanists, for master's students and grad students and doctoral students, as well as tinkerers and innovators and creators. I think it's the reuse, right? It's all about the reuse. Interoperability is like the internally facing word, but reuse is the externally facing word. This enables reuse. So that's my thought.
So we are hitting the end of the session, I think. So I wonder if we can continue the conversation in the Slack channel, and perhaps set up a time, or I don't know, Claire and Rachel and Leander, if you want to set up a time to continue the conversation, or I know we have a roadmap session on Friday, I think, where we might provide some updates as well.
Yeah, I think if people want to add things to the Slack channel, but also we do have this notes document. So I'll put a line in the notes document of where we've got to in this hour. But if anybody wants to add things to that notes document or below that line, that would be really useful, because then I can see all the content when I do a summing up for later in the week at the end of session. But we will be picking this up in the outreach meeting. So we don't have one in December because that falls in between Christmas and New Year, but we will be picking this up at the January meeting, which I know is a way off. But please continue to add things to the outreach Slack channel and to this document. And then we can pick it up there, and look out for the outreach group meetings. We meet the last Tuesday of the month. And I know end of January is quite a way off, but we have got sort of the holidays in between. But please continue to add thoughts and do keep thinking about this, about how you think it would work for yourselves, both as users and creators of IIIF content. It'd be really useful to know what's the sort of thing that you would have found useful while implementing, or to include when you are reusing IIIF. Leander, is there anything you would like to add or ask for before we let people head off?
No, I just want to say thank you for thinking about the idea, and let's see what can grow in the future.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This was really great. I think it was a really productive conversation. So we are going to start the lightning talks in about 12 minutes. So if you want to get up and stretch or run and grab a coffee, We have just a few minutes to do that, and then we will start back up. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Claire, Rachel, and Leander again.
Thanks, Meg.
Thank you.